The Gloriana set by ThebeMoon. Read by LMX Mabella. Chapter 48. Healing. At 7:47 p.m. on Friday, Hermione ducked into the chilly alcove near the Gryffindor common room and tapped the Marauder's map with her lit wand. "I solemnly swear I am up to no good." Draco thought he had smarted her, but she'd prove him wrong. Confidently, she scanned the Slytherin dungeons, the classrooms on the upper floor, likely alcoves in the ground-floor storage room. But no Draco. Hermione hunched over the parchment, checking and rechecking dots. Where was he? How did he do it? It must be some place the Marauders never found. A Slytherin hideout? Some place new, perhaps, created during the renovations this summer? Hermione bit her lip. Maybe she should. Wait. There he was, in the fourth-floor corridor that linked Gryffindor Tower and the Owlery. Draco's thought lingered near a bit of a wall opposite a balcony and then disappeared. Hermione stared at the map in disbelief. He was there and then gone, just like in their sixth. She shoved the parchment in the pocket of her cardigan and left the alcove, walking briskly to the fourth floor. The corridor was lined up with pictures of the Scottish moors. Flickering torchlight reflected off the floor-to-ceiling windows on her left. Draco was nowhere in sight. Hermione pulled out the map again. There was no dot but hers in the corridor or the balcony. She looked curiously at the bit of wall where she had seen that dot. Draco was nearby. She was sure of it. She tucked the map back into her pocket, prepared to wait him out when the stone wall shimmered slightly and a small, low door appeared, painted green. The door opened, and she stood amazed as Draco ducked through. He spotted her immediately, even before he'd straightened to his full height, and the smile had a hint of triumph. "You're late," he said. Hermione was still staring at the door. "Is that what I think it is?" "Yes, come see." Draco took her hand, and she smiled, for he looked a bit excited, his usual hauteur completely gone. He pulled her into a small, rectangular room with a flat ceiling and no windows. The only furnishings were a thick, luxurious brown carpet, a few large cushions, and 2 standing lamps. Draco's black suit coat was draped over a cream-colored cushion. But the walls were the real wonder. Hermione stood agog, mouth open, for runes danced across the walls, the color of parchment, the figures shifting colors as they moved. A tree appeared, its leaves rustling silently, followed by a longship with square sails moving across the wall. Her gaze turned to Draco, and he silently gestured upward, where more runes spun in a slow circle. "The Codex," she whispered, hardly daring to speak, or it would all disappear. She squeezed Draco's hand. "The Room of Requirement. You asked it to show you the Codex." "I found the room last week," Draco said. "I needed a place to hide from." He stopped and cleared his throat. "Who?" Hermione couldn't help asking. She couldn't imagine who could drive Draco Malfoy into hiding. "Luna Lovegood," he confessed. "She's developed a renovation plan for the Malfoy cellars. She thinks the underground spaces would make an excellent meditative retreat." Draco suddenly looked drained, and Hermione bit her lip to keep from laughing. "The daft witch has been hounding me for weeks. She thinks we can tap into groundwater source to create a spring of renewal, and the positive meditative energy could chase away any lingering dark spirits." He swallowed and shook his head. No wonder he was hiding. "And so the door appeared?" she asked. "Yes, here, sit down." Draco settled them both on cushions and loosened his tie. He was in all black as usual, from tie and dress shirt to trousers and polished shoes. His hair reflected the golden light from the lamps and moving lines of runes. A flick of Draco's wand, and a silver tray holding a matching tea set floated over, gently landing on the carpet before them. The teapot began to fill the cups, followed by lumps of sugar and a tiny silver pitcher of milk leaping into action. Draco produced a flask and waited for a nod from Hermione before adding a dollop, a rather large one, of siren scotch to each cup. Hermione noted the engraved M on the teapot and tray, but said nothing, noting that another matching tray held fruit, nuts, and toast. She darkly suspected a house elf had been involved, but said nothing. See, she could restrain herself. Light night snack was a good idea, since she'd been too busy arguing with Neville to eat much at dinner. Draco just might succeed where Ron and Harry had failed for years. getting Hermione to eat regularly. "So the door appeared," Hermione prompted as she munched her toast. Draco nodded. "I was walking back from the gallery when I heard Lovegood singing. But I couldn't see her, and I panicked, thinking, I need somewhere to hide, and there it was." "What did the room look like?" Hermione asked, curious. "It was little more than a closet." Draco's eyes were wide. "I thought it had been destroyed, the room of requirement." He looked around, saying the last 3 words almost with reverence. Hermione covered his hands with hers. The room stirred up painful memories for both of them. She was surprised Draco would even enter it. A friend had died in the room of hidden things, and Draco himself had been saved from the fiend fire by Harry. They sat quietly for a time, hands linked, both thinking back to that terrifying scene. The fiend fire spreading out of control, Hermione and Ron on a broom flying toward Draco, who was hauling an unconscious Goyle up a tower of charred death. The heat had been nearly overwhelming, and she remembered Draco's eyes, nearly mad with horror and fear. Had it only been months ago? "Healing," she finally said, finding her voice. "What?" Draco asked absently. He had been clutching his teacup, lost in thought. "The castle is healing," she said. "Hogwarts, a history describes an attack by giants in 1343, led by dark wizards. The giants tore down an entire tower, but the castle rebuilt itself slowly over decades, stone by stone." She tugged on Draco's hand slightly, drawing him closer. "McGonagall told me that parts of the castle are healing these days. Sometimes builders will arrive to repair a wall or turret and find it already half finished. The room of requirements must have healed as well, moving to another floor." "It's smaller." Draco set down his teacup, slipping an arm around her. They leaned back against the wall, watching the dancing runes. "This is the biggest I could make it, and I can't provide furniture, only cushions and rugs." Is the room of—" Hermione couldn't finish. "I tried. I asked for the room of hidden things." His voice was steady. "But no door appeared." He swallowed. "Just a faint smell of smoke." Hermione leans against his shoulder while nibbling an apple slice. His body felt warm through the smooth, rich fabric of his shirt. "I'm sorry your friend died," she said. "He deserved it." Draco's voice was cold. "He tried to kill you." "You can still be sorry." "I led him to it. Vince wasn't smart enough to think for himself. I did the thinking for him. I taught him to hate." "Yes, you did," Hermione said. There was no denying it. Without Malfoy's poisonous influence, Crabbe and Goyle might have turned out more like Bloom and Pratt, thick but harmless. Mostly harmless, she corrected herself, remembering Draco's Quidditch injury. Hermione ate the last apple slice and started in on the walnuts. She hoped Draco wasn't too hungry. She'd already finished the toast. Draco added a bit more scotch to their teacups. "I cannot wait to graduate. Every stone of this place is haunted." She couldn't help but agree. It was time for a new generation, free of old prejudices and war wounds, to shape Hogwarts anew. She thought of the squeaky mice and McGonagall's effort for inter-house unity. Maybe it had already begun. "What will you do after Hogwarts?" Draco gave her a sideways look. "My plans are in flux," he said. "I know what I won't be doing. I won't hide away in Wiltshire, mingling only with pureblood society. I won't live my parents' life." He sighed. "But it's hard to imagine a different future for Malfoy." "You're already living that future," Hermione said. "You found this place because you hated what happened in the manor." She set down her teacup, looking regretfully at the now empty snack tray. "It will take more than a room of requirements to escape Luna, though. She's relentless." Draco looked mischievous. "Maybe I'll send her to Mother." There was a brief silence as they both pictured Luna having tea at the manor, telling Narcissa her plans for the cellars. Hermione started to giggle, and Draco's smile widened. But then his eyes clouded over, recalling a dark memory at the manor, most likely. The room seemed to darken with a Slytherin's mood, despite the dancing runes. So Hermione dropped his hand and slid off her cushion onto her knees. Before Draco could react, she was straddling his outstretched back, scooting forward until she could put her hands on his shoulders. His eyes widened. "Come back to me," she said, looking down at him. "Always," Draco said. Hands moved to her waist. Their lips met, and Hermione melted into him, once again forgetting their surroundings, her senses filled with his warmth and his touch. Then she pulled away slightly, unbuttoning her now official secret Tour de Faire cardigan. She had Draco's sharp intake of breath at the sight of the dull gold halter top, the cardigan falling to the carpet. Rough palms moved up her bare back. "You wore this at the Gryffindor party?" he murmured. "Yes," was all she said, her eyes sliding shut as he kissed her. "You were so beautiful that night," Draco said in her ear, hands still roaming over her skin. "I could only watch you, wondering if I was mad to aspire to such heights." He swallowed. "I still wonder." Hermione opened her eyes, surprised. For 7 years Draco Malfoy had looked down at her with scowls and sneers, but now she remembered him watching her at the Gryffindor party, face upraised in a yellow ring of light. 1 week, she said, still hardly believing it. We had been back at school for a single week, and you were staring at me. I didn't know what to think. Who else would I stare at? Draco wanted to know. You were everywhere that week, writing in your notebook at breakfast, yawning in ancient runes, fighting with me in potions. His hands were moving away. Sitting at my side in defense against the dark arts, your curls brushing my shoulder, your skirt riding up those long legs, your left knee so close. His hand stroked the knee in question. His words were breathier in her ear. All of it, it drove me mad. I became obsessed. Obsessed. Thea's words floated through her mind. Draco's obsession with you is dangerous, possessive. Perhaps Theo had been right, once. Entirely obsessed. Draco's voice was matter-of-fact, although his hands hadn't stopped moving. Since the first day, you outshone every other witch in the school. Brilliant, powerful, with that roving eye. Hermione blinked. Roving eye? Draco withdrew his hand and leaned back against the wall again, looking a bit stern. Oh, yes. I saw you looking around, Hermione, during that first breakfast. You were finished with the weasel, that much was obvious, although he couldn't see it. I watched you consider and rightfully reject one Gryffindor after another. You passed over Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws without a second glance. He smiled slightly. I saw you watch Blaise walk by, and I saw you watching me, and flushing when I winked at you. Hermione couldn't deny it. She had said as much to Ron on their failed date at Hogsmeade. I didn't survive a while to go back to being a prim little bookworm, she said, beginning to pull at his tie. I wasn't going to play that role anymore. I was going to do what I wanted, where I wanted, when I wanted. She unspooled the tie easily. Years of fixing Ron and Harry's tie had made her adept, and began unbuttoning his shirt, unfastening the silver cuffling. It was like a wrapped present, black on the outside and so pale beneath. Draco was quiet now, head tilted slightly back, watching her through half-closed eyes. Go on with your story, Hermione ordered, or I'll stop. His lips curved upwards. I was going to make my move that night of the party, he said obediently. Hermione tried to listen and not just watch the light from the runes play across his features. Gave a low chuckle. 1 week back at school, barely out of Azkaban, hated by the entire student body, and I turn up at a Gryffindor party on a Saturday night, determined to seduce Hermione Granger. It did sound mad, Hermione had to admit. He had unbuttoned enough of Draco's shirt to reveal a deep, slender V of pale skin, grenading a finger down the center of his chest. What were you going to do? He couldn't help but ask, the usual desire for knowledge almost overcoming other desires. He said nothing as she unbuttoned the shirt entirely and pulled it off. It was so perfect. Even the thin silver scars from spells and hexes and Godric knew what else were perfect. Not even the dark marks, still vivid but unmoving, could detract from the lovely long lines of muscles and veins. She had almost forgotten what they— Oh, yes, the story. Go on, she said, tossing the shirt aside and putting her hands on her hips. Draco sighed. I'm rather ashamed to tell you. Hermione raised an eyebrow. Do keep in mind that I'd barely known you a week, he said. I mean, as the different me, knowing a different you, than I knew before when I— Hermione's eyes widened. Well, then the man is babbling. Draco pulled himself together and continued. On the night of the party, my plans was to lure you out of the common room, get you into an alcove, probably. His gaze became hooded and dangerous. "Fuck you against the wall." "Really?" she breathed. Draco looked at her significantly, and she remembered. "I promised not to stop." Her pulse began to race as she unbuckled his belt. She didn't know what she was doing, just that she didn't want him to stop talking. "I knew there was something between us," he continued. "I felt it in the carriage, and it only grew stronger. Thoughts of you in the charms classroom stripping for me were driving me mad, keeping me awake. I thought perhaps a one-time thing, hot sex between enemies, would take care of it. Then we would—" He cleared his throat. "We would go our separate ways. You'd find someone else, someone more suitable." She rolled her eyes. "Lovely plan." "So I show up at the Gryffindor Tower with siren scotch. I had it all planned, and you weren't even there." Draco looked annoyed, an echo of the irritation he'd felt that night. "I was out with Ron," she said, not even trying to hide a smile. He reached for the back of her neck, her fingers fumbling with the halter's tiny buttons. "Yes, you were." Gave her a kiss, then looked at her reproachfully. "Splendid, I thought. She's back with the weasel after all. But then the weasel comes back without you, left you there alone at the village." His face darkened. "I gave him a piece of my mind and stormed out, vaguely thinking of marching to Hogsmeade to find you." They were both silent a moment. Draco apparently brooding over Ron's ungentlemanly behavior, and Hermione considering what would have happened if he'd showed up at the Leaky Cauldron. She'd been furious with Ron. Draco just might have gotten some revenge sex against the wall. Draco's voice brought her back to her surroundings. "I'm not seeing a lot of progress here." "Carry on then," Hermione said, now working on his shoes. "Instead, I came across Daphne in the halls," he went on. "She said she saw you stomping toward the potions dungeon looking ready to kill somebody, so I talked to Slughorn, then go back to the party." Hermione was giggling now, imagining the high and mighty Draco Malfoy wandering the castle looking for her, trying to salvage his big seduction plan. "Enough talking," Draco said, pulling his shoes out of her hand and casting them aside. His eyes threatened to burn the halter top of her body. "No," she managed to insist. "Finish the story." He pulled a golden silk over her head and shook out her hair. Draco stared, and then shook his head as if to clear it. "So I returned to the party," he went on a bit hoarsely. "And there you were, standing on the sofa, so beautiful, almost shimmering, your magic." Pulled her to him, rolling his body, and Hermione found herself on her back, his face looming above her. His hands pulled her wrists above her head, holding them down. Draco kissed her lips roughly, desperately. "I was ready to do anything." Voice cracked as he looked down at her. "Hate sex against the wall wasn't enough anymore. I wondered if I could get you to a classroom, even my bedroom." Hermione began to tremble. She'd had no idea. She'd been recklessly drinking and dancing that night, and if Draco had gotten her alone outside the Gryffindor common room. Draco rolled off her suddenly and sat up, and Hermione propped herself on her elbows, looking at him curiously. He was frowning now. "Then, of course, you met Thea." Draco's voice was suddenly cool. "And we had that charming scene with Creevy, and Theo leaves, and you stop dancing, and I think, finally—" He looked down at her reproachfully. "And then you fall asleep on the sofa." "It had been a long day," Hermione admitted. "Well," he sighed, "at that point I knew I was beaten. I couldn't leave you, though. You were alone in the room, alone and sleeping. I'm not the weasel. I had to stay until you woke up." "And so you did." She reached an arm toward him, and he came to her, kissing her with that old desperation, his tongue deep and aggressive. Hermione didn't know how long they lay there, exploring each other's mouth, but it almost felt like they were on the sofa at the Gryffindor party again, with all the former distrust and insecurities falling away. She'd wanted Draco so badly that night, even if she wouldn't admit it. Draco stripped off his trousers, and Hermione cast off her skirt, and they came together again, their touches becoming rougher, almost hysterical. Seemed to glow in the light of the runes, his eyes most of all. "I'm not demanding anything," Draco whispered, moving his mouth on her throat. "I'll take whatever you're willing to give." Hermione was trembling. I want this," she stammered, "but it's all so much." She hoped Draco would understand. And if he did understand, then maybe he could explain it to her. but he surprised her again. "I know, I'm not used to any of this either." He raised his head and gave her a wry look. "All this sharing?" "It does seem very un-Malfoy," Hermione agreed. He sighed. "You have no idea." He ran her palms up his jaw and into his hair. "I think you're doing quite well. Better than Blaise and Theo, certainly." He put his lips towards hers. "But now it's time to stop talking." He was murmuring brokenly into her hair, and Hermione's mind recalled where they were, far from their assigned beds, and it must be getting late. "Shh," Draco said as she tried to sit up. "We're all right." "It's after curfew, and—" "We're all right," he repeated in a soothing tone. "We can get to our rooms tomorrow morning," he breathed in her ear. "Stay." Hermione knew she shouldn't, but she didn't have the strength to move. She shivered and suddenly felt the weight of a heavy, soft blanket over both of them. The room still worked. "Sleep, darling," he said in his velvet tones, and there was no resisting that. Hermione felt him shift slightly so his chest was to her back, his arm around her. "Sleep," he repeated, and she obeyed, although she didn't want to, because in this moment dreams could never surpass the reality of Draco. To be continued. Next up, Potion Lab, Squeaky Mice, and Diagon Alley. Thank you for listening to this chapter of the Gloriana set by ThebeMoon, read by Myrtle. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, AO3, or Spotify.